Welcome to the WanderLearn podcast. I'm your host, Franz Tapon. In this episode, I interviewed the Hunter of the Year. I asked him, why do poachers poach? How have things changed for hunters since the previous century? Are hunters an endangered species? Why do hunters only target old males? Why don't they also hunt old females? And why can't we just convert all the hunting zones into photographic safari zones? And now for one important favor before you listen to this podcast, can you please go to Apple Podcasts and write a review? Right now I've got about 4 out of 5 star ratings, and that's mainly because this one little jerk has given me a 1-star rating and another person gave me a 3-star rating because I swear too much. I would like to balance this out, give me a few 5-star reviews, and that'll help me boost into a little bit higher ratings. That would do me a lot of good. So write a short little review, hit 5 stars, and thank you very much. In this episode, I have Jaco Oosthuizen. You won an award, Hunter of the Year.
Right, yeah, that's correct, yeah. We've been
Professional hunter.
yeah, that's right.
So, as opposed to amateur hunter.
Well, I guess, if you want to really define it.
Exactly. So tell us about your history. You were born in South Africa?
Yeah, I was actually born in Namibia, which, and I know not a lot of people know this, but it's a country just north of South Africa. So, yeah, my ancestors arrived in Africa some 300 years ago, and when what was called the Great Trek, when the settlers didn't want to stay under English rule, around 1840 they moved out of the Cape Peninsula. And yeah, my ancestors went straight due north and through Botswana and what was called the first land trek, because it was mostly desert parts of the very dry, arid regions. They went through and they finally ended up in Angola, and actually stayed in Angola for a while until, due to some obvious political reasons, later on moved back south and settled in northern part of Namibia.
Here we are at the Safari Club International Conference, and there are a lot of hunters running around. Why did they pick you out of all the hunters that are there? Why are you the best?
Well, there's a lot of criteria around it, and yeah, certainly I think when they did the introduction the other day, standing there backstage, you can't hear every single word they're saying, but they obviously talked about that a little bit. But I think a big part of it is, is your presence, having been around here. It's not just about your hunting skills, but obviously it's a big contributing factor, because if you're not successful in hunting, you're not going to be around here for long enough. And a big part is, what we do in terms of fundraising for organizations such as Safari Club International, because they do fight a lot of battles for us as hunters, professional hunters, and as we would like to see ourselves also very much as conservationists from Africa. A big part of what we do in hunting is funding truly wildlife areas which otherwise would be very hard to maintain and protect. But increasingly over the last 22 years, this is my 22nd year attending the convention, and things changed dramatically since back in 1999, the first time I came over. And so our challenges are increasing every day, and more funds are needed to make sure we keep the channels open for hunting, and in the bigger context of things generating funds.
What has changed in the last 20 years?
Well, just mostly the anti-stigma around hunting. A lot of people obviously think there is not place for it in this modern day society anymore. But what a lot of people don't know, just purely because they don't spend time out down in the ground, this is in Africa specifically, rural populations in Africa are just exploding. You're still sitting in this modern day context where people are supposedly educated, but they still sit in rural Africa with families of 10, 12 children in a family which they can hardly support. They feed them with a bag of maize meal, a month kind of thing. It's really poor communities, and they just, but to them their children is their wealth. But it's really, end of the day, all these people need to make a living, so they need land to grow their crops, to grow the corn that they need to bag and to feed these people. They need land to feed the cattle, to feed their families. And so that's really where the human-wildlife conflict really comes in, and where the habitat for wildlife is on the decrease. And so, hunting is quite essential because a lot of touristic parts in Africa, there's national parks, there's a place for everybody in this world. And if you're from Africa, Africa's got just a different type of special magic to it, and especially, when I was born there in 1973, obviously, infrastructure was created big time, over the last 30, 40 years. So just in that regard, things have changed. But as the world develops, populations are increasing, and it just becomes more and more difficult to maintain true wildlife habitat, because essentially, in one way or the other, everybody's trying to make a buck to survive.
You mentioned something that I wish people talked about more, and that a lot of the wildlife that is disappearing in Africa is simply because Homo sapiens are reproducing very fast and encroaching on habitat. And therefore, that it's not so much that we're hunting them to death. It's not like we're chasing after them. But I think the perception of a lot of people is that why are elephants decreasing in population? It's because the hunters, because they're the ones who've got the guns. And that's what people think. Right. So, and they don't necessarily say, well, if somebody's having 10 children and a bunch of families are having lots of children, all the things you just said. And how can does SCI have some sort of effort into try to educate the African population to say, okay, these are the consequences of a high population? Or do they do anything to say, hey, maybe we should bring down the population rate?
Well, a lot of that has to do rather, I think, with the operators. Let's talk now about the areas where hunting operators operate in. And I take myself, for instance, we have these conversations with our people ourselves. And honestly, and I'm talking to people that's educated, they speak English, they speak the language, they've been in schools. And they'll just tell me in simple English, us black people, we're not the same as you white people, and that's not being a racist remark. That is just the way they think, because, they still practice what is generally known as the lobola system, where, the
right price.
Right, yeah. So when daughters are married off, the father gets income, and I think that's a big part of it. It's also a business in a certain way to speak, But it's just part of their culture, and one has to respect that, I guess, to a certain degree.
It's also a retirement form. It's a retirement savings account. In other words, if you have 10 children, there's a good chance that one of them will do well enough to support you in the future.
Exactly, So yeah, one can look at it. There is a lot of method to the madness around it, especially the way they look at it, because those are the traditions that they grow up in, and that's what they're used to. One has to respect it, I guess, to a certain degree. But yeah, so if SCI would certainly make contributions, clinics are built, joint ventures are done between organizations such as SCI and hunting outfitters. If clinics are built and educated people are put in there, but it is still a very, very hard battle, And it's not just that. Now you can bring in the whole issue on more serious poaching. When we look at rhino poaching and elephant poaching, so at the end of that whole scenario, there is rich people or rich crooked people in the world sitting, making money out of it. The guy that's on the ground that's actually going to poach the elephant or the rhino, bigger context, he actually receives a very minuscule amount of it, but for him it's survival. And obviously what you find is that they've got nothing else to do. There's the unemployment rate so high. And the bottom line is, my dad always used to say, if your stomach starts to talk, it starts to ache, then you pay attention. And so they want to feed their families. They're also proud of their families, and they'll do anything. If they don't do anything, they're going to die of hunger. So he's willing to take the risk if he's going to get caught, get shot out there, or get killed by an elephant because he's got inadequate equipment, wounding it, and that's why, the the populations of these animals are on the decline due to poaching, because hunters have got adequate equipment. It's typically a good, clean kill. People practice, we know what we're doing. But these guys go in there and they might end up wounding 5 or 10 elephant before they get one down on the ground. So the rest going to die somewhere else because they're very much aware of the fact that they don't have adequate equipment, so they're not necessarily going to follow them like we will and finish the job, because it's not just an ethical thing. They want to get in there and get out of there as quick as they can before they get caught. So they on the bottom of that whole pyramid, and again it's just the crooked people on top of it that's really making the big bucks out of it. So that's the sad thing that we're fighting in this world. The guys down on the ground are just basically doing the job.
Let's shift a little bit to the actual nuts and bolts of hunting. In other words, what sets you apart as an exceptional hunter? What do you think you do differently than the typical hunter out there, or maybe a newer hunter that goes out there? Is it the way that you prepare for the hunt ahead of time? Is it your equipment? Is it the way you stalk the prey, the way you set bait, or what is it that, I'm not asking you to reveal all your secrets, but some of the secret sauce of what makes Jaco so successful?
Bottom line is, it comes back to your earlier question, and how this is all put together in terms of what I said, being here for so long. I think it all boils down to experience. End of the day, it's like anything else. You do it for long enough. Certain things, and especially obviously the important things, just come naturally. It just becomes second nature. Making sure that everything is running. Clients spend a lot of money to get over to Africa. And we say spend a lot of money. To run operations where we operate in remote areas is very expensive, and so purely getting clients there, the investment they make just to be there, to have our presence felt, in itself is a big anti-poaching tool, let alone the actual anti-poaching that is done. So through all of that, protecting your areas, when people, obviously what we advertise and market in terms of the experience that we offer is the real, true, traditional African experience. So we really try to keep our areas free from human encroachment, keep it as natural as we possibly can, and just really create a truly great experience for the client. So essentially the hunting part of it makes out a very, very small portion of it. We really try to focus on the experience and the adventure itself. And I think that's probably been the key to our success, is because we have found over the years, just being out there and being able to, if I can use the old cliche, to smell the roses, things just happen. It comes about, and if you sustainably manage your area through hunting, it's rather easy to stick to our ethical rules of trying to take out just older male specimens. That's basically entering the last quarter of their lifespan, basically done breeding. So in general, you're not affecting breeding herds. The animals that basically, if we can put it like this, make the sacrifice for the rest to survive, is a very small percentage. And really, if one understands the bigger picture, makes it a total amount of sense.
Some people may be wondering why hunters don't kill the old females that are beyond their reproductive age as well.
All right, you get to private land mostly in southern Africa and to a certain degree Botswana, but Namibia, South Africa, Zimbabwe to a certain degree as well. The landowners will do that because the protein supply is always very well distributed, and even if it's private land, but there's still local communities around, or again funds that's generated just if it's like you have in United States, where people come and will draw tags just to hunt does for meat. The same practice exists over there, where people will go and hunt for meat purposes, and again funds generated for that helps to maintain the land. So it does happen. I think the issue though when it comes to what we do in government areas, obviously, when I say government areas, total free-range areas, which are mostly government land, managed by government and the government conservation departments, and they typically have a government official with us out there hunting as well. And I just think, from a management standpoint, in some countries, and I'm not so sure these days anymore, but I know, like in Zimbabwe, for instance, it was allowed. Where we operate a lot in Tanzania, it is not allowed. And I think it's just a rule that it's just been laid down to create any confusion on what represents an old female and what not. Because it's not, obviously, with males it's much easier to distinguish that factor. I'm talking on quick split seconds, Then you also have to understand that there is also your predators that's roaming around in these areas. So typically, you have to leave a certain percentage of, and let's call it then your weaker animals, which will be, it's either your young, very young animals, just born babies, and older animals, not just specifically females, but that's basically slowing down. And those are more typical your prey for these predators and scavengers that has to survive. So you have to maintain the balance of that as well to make sure there's enough food for the whole ecosystem to survive.
I see. So basically, by not hunting the females, one thing is that they're not as easy to identify as the male, the older males, the age of the female, I suppose. But also, as you're saying, is that, well, maybe a hyena or a vulture or whatever, they need something. And so if a female keels over on her just of old age, then these other animals can come and they have dinner.
Right. No, it's practically that, I mean, you see that a lot. I mean, you see a lot of clips, of lions taking on buffalo, and I mean, they just have a way to find the weak links, and that's what it's all about. Obviously, animals that are more in the prime of their life and more agile, moving around and able to get out of the harm's way, if I can put it like that, are harder to catch. But somewhere along the line, there's always this old joke, like a herd of buffalo can only move as fast as the slowest one, so inevitably the slowest one gets taken out. So, and the herd gets to be faster, and then, and the survival rate's better, but it's just a very, very graphic description of how it works. So, yeah.
Now let's ask a question regarding the far future. So I'm looking 60 years ahead when you and I are both dead. So don't worry, whoever listens to these projections, you'll never be able to say you'll be dead by the time they tell you you're wrong. But what is the future of hunting, let's say 40, 50, 60 years from now, toward the end of this century? What do you think is the reality? What's it going to be like? Because you have to imagine that Africa right now has about 1.3 billion people. By then, it's going to have close to 4 billion. And so roughly, tripling or quadrupling of the population. And meanwhile, you have forces that want to discourage hunting on all levels. There's bans, trophy. Do you think this is a trend that might continue so that the hunting is just almost untenable, or maybe just on small private reserves? Will it be kind of a lost art, like making, horses? They have the horseshoes. Yeah. Like, who does that anymore? Right. Whereas before, 2 centuries ago, 3 centuries ago, everybody knew how to make a horseshoe. Right. So, what is your opinion? Your crystal ball tell you?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't quite exactly call it the crystal ball, but
your foggy ball.
Yeah, probably more something like that. But no, yeah. To be quite honest, if we're honest with ourselves, we're currently fighting for what we believe in and what we know is right, and because even for those who don't understand, it's hard to believe that we actually care, for the wilderness where we operating in out there. But the future is not looking good. I mean, like I said, the fight's just intensifying every day. Basically, it's not just politics and governance, but like we said, the human explosion. And I think sadly, finally, it's going to come down to just private land that's going to survive, and hunting on private land. It's there's different horses for different courses, and everybody does appreciate different scenarios and what they're doing. Personally, for me, I'm very much big into free-ranging wild areas.
Don't most hunters? I mean, if they had enough money, isn't that what they prefer? I mean, who would rather have like a small little pen of like a 1 square kilometer and go hunt a lion? I mean, there's nobody who likes that, does there?
No, exactly. I mean, but that's the problem we're dealing with, and I mean, that's where we'll benefit so much more if we can actually get the hand ties just on board to make time to listen to what is said and done, and why we need to keep these wild areas surviving, and who's paying for that and how it's funded. Because by continuing fighting the hunting part of it at the rate they do, and using political structures and what I like to refer to as allowing politicians, political playballs, just to get votes to stay in power wherever they are. Because essentially, if that's the case, they don't care what's going on, because we all know the truth of what's happening down there on the ground. Then, they are driving. It's not a matter of driving the industry in the ground. They're driving all the conservation efforts and wildlife habitat into the ground, and they won't realize it until it's too late. And what's going to be left over then is going to be only practically game range hunting, which is, like you said, I mean, everybody really wants to do the free range, and especially if you look at Americans, there's so much free range hunting out here, and when they go over to Africa, that's what they expect to do, and that is the real true fair chase hunting. Yeah, you get big properties, private land, that's huntable, that's also fair chase, and there's also really good hunting available on that. But, it's one thing when you do that on plains game, but when you start to, bring it down to animals such as elephants that just needs, thousands of miles to be able to roam around and survive naturally, bring in the lions. I mean, you can only have in an enclosed area, if you want to even do it for conservation purposes and just nice to have, you can only have that many lions in an enclosed area, where with they roam free and naturally, their natural survival rate obviously is so much better, but that can only be done through true conservation and true funding. But there is just way too many areas that's remote enough that people are not aware of and will never be aware of, that needs this kind of funding, and it can only be done through hunting. So yeah, but come back to your question is, I don't know, if we're not going to be able to change mindsets and get people from these two polar opposites onto the same table, and at least make time to listen to the differences and the, to get the facts on the table, and at least just give each other a chance. I mean, we understand, I think as hunters we very much understand that, where anti-hunters come from. I've always said, we don't expect everybody to be hunters, or to love hunting. I think if that's the case, then we'll have a problem in this world. It is a very, very specific activity, and I think only few people is born to participate in it, because people that hunt, for the most of it, don't do it out of bloodthirst or anything else, it starts with the challenge of stalking up on something, and outsmarting them, and animals with their natural skills to survive and stuff. It's a great challenge, to learn the skills to outsmart them and actually do it right, and get in there, and you're close to the ground. You smell the soil, you smell the fresh grass and leaves and everything else. I mean, the birds that's going along. I mean, I always say there's no way to get as closely in touch with nature as when you're hunting. And so if you take the number of hours and days and time and money that's spent on hunting versus the actual kill, if we want to call it that, it takes a special person to have that patience, for starters, to do that and to meet their goals. And And as you mature in it, it is certainly a matter of, and again, people, it's hard to understand if you've never done it, but you do appreciate and respect those animals, because it gets to a point, certainly, where you certainly just justify, and if I take myself that's been doing this for 26 years, I can certainly only justify continuing hunting, because I understand not only the principles but the outcome of the funds that's generated of doing. If guys like myself and hundreds that's down here on the floor behind us decide to stop doing this, it will all be down the gutter in a heartbeat. So
what will be down in the gutter?
The industry itself. The industry. Wildlife areas, the wildlife themselves, conservation areas.
But explain that to some people, because they might be listening to this and saying, what do you mean? If you take away all the hunters, the wildlife goes away? That doesn't make any sense. You guys are shooting them all.
Well, and that's the thing, because a lot of people don't understand that there's quotas, it's government controlled. There's no government area where anybody, and I think this is a lot of people think, we just go in there and shoot left, right, and center, whatever we like, But and that's where also the whole concept of taking off the whole oldest male specimens come in. It's very selective hunting, and a quota that's set by government. These quotas are determined through biological studies, and game counts. So, and then obviously also the takeoff through the years, the sustainability of that has been established, and so it's actually very, very scientific. So, if you take in a certain given area of the population you have, and this is now just general average, some areas might be a little bit more, others less, but you're lucky if you have, in terms of meeting our goals and ethics and what I said earlier, taking off older male specimens, if you have 6% of your population of that specific species that will meet that criteria, then you have a lot. So that's a very small percentage of what hunters actually take off. But that small percentage just generates so much money to maintain areas that are unknown to the general public. They never know of areas where we hunt that don't exist. People think, and I think also a lot of people that just have no clue what's going on. They think we go into places like the Serengeti or Ngorongoro Crater or Kruger National Park or wherever it might be, and just help ourselves as we please, and they don't understand actually how strictly and how well it's controlled and managed.
What's the biggest misconception that people have, you would say, that you would really love to correct?
A big part of that is what I've just said, that they don't understand that it's controlled. They really think hunters pick up rifles, guns, and just drive out there and shoot. Shoot whatever they want.
Hold on 1 second. Sorry to interrupt. But what about if they're saying to you, but wait, Jaco, why don't we just make them all photographic safari parks? Why can't we just make them all national parks? Why do we actually have to shoot anything? Why can't we just let, safari parks exist. There's lots of free animals running around. Why can't we just make everything a safari park? Why do we have to have a single hunting block anywhere?
Well, first of all, the safari parks that's existing currently, they're not necessarily 100% booked or occupied by tourists, at any given time. But you're dealing with wild areas that carries bugs such as tsetse fly that's known to carry the sleeping sickness, areas that are swampy, that are high breeding grounds for mosquitoes carrying malaria, and all sorts of other diseases. And people don't understand, being a hunter and being an adventurer, you have to endure a lot of challenges out there physically, being out in the bush. And even then, we see very often for people that comes into the deal that's been interested, and it's not easy. It's not. For us as professional hunters that live out there all the time, you get used to it. But you go down on the floor here and ask the hunters what they think about a tsetse fly, and obviously some of them, the hardened hunters, learn to tolerate it. But if a hunter that's a true adventurer that's willing to sleep with the lions under the stars, when a vehicle breaks down, and just tough things out. And that's a small percentage of people in the world that can do that. So a lot of these areas is just not accessible and suitable for the general public. And the only way to protect it, because the big thing is generating funds. And generating the funds, I mean, like, if I take, for instance, I think it's like the 2014 or 13 to 16, the Tanzanian government or government department, conservation department, published figures of what there's a comparison of the income that photographic tourism generated versus hunting tourism and tourist hunting. And I mean, at that point, the average hunting was doing 4 times more than the photographic tourist. Also taken at the rate that the photographic tourists pay to the government per day, for instance, to be in the national parks like the Ruaha National Park and Serengeti and Ngorongoro Crater, wherever, the carbon footprint that that leaves to, I mean, and still it's a quarter of the hunting industry's income. But, I mean, we're talking thousands more people that has to enter those areas. And then you come to the Ngorongoro Crater, which is already a very sensitive piece of land.
Ecosystem.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, thank you. And so there's always the pros and the cons. And the deal is just that the hunting just generates, I think, the necessary income that's required for this just at such a much faster rate and a much less carbon footprint, if we want to bring that into play then as well.
I just understand you correctly. Did you say that in Tanzania, hunters bring in 4 times more revenue, not per capita, but actually not per person, not per hunter, but 4 times as a total gross amount than the photographic tourist industry? Yeah,
and that's the actual money and fees that's paid to the government. So we're not talking the gross income that's paid to the expense of lodges and hotels and stuff. That's just the
what the government makes out of the thing. So and of course there are probably at least 100, if not 1,000, photographic tours for every one hunter, probably something like that.
Right. Yeah, I actually sat down and I made the calculation one day, but yeah, practically, I mean, the numbers are just it's just a huge difference.
Right. So clearly the hunter is contributing a lot more, at least to the government coffers, way more on a per person basis, on a per capita basis, like hundreds of times more.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's clearly the situation. And like I said, the last stats that I've seen in that regard was 2016. And over the last 3-4 years, that certainly changed perhaps a bit because the market, because of various pressures in the world, in the hunting industry declining a little bit, there has certainly been less income for the government. But I'd still venture to say at this point that it's perhaps pretty equal at this point of time. But if you take out of a possible, I think it's 855 hunting areas that should be available in Tanzania, currently only an odd 80 are occupied, and so I would say at least 50% of the balance of those blocks are well, they'll never be the same. It'll take a lot of money and a lot of hard work to get them back to where they were, because a lot of those blocks haven't been occupied for 7 years, and some of them even up to 10 years. So.
And now some people might say, well, it's great that's not occupied because then wildlife returns, but actually what happens is the poachers return.
Well, it's poachers, but mostly it's just
agriculture.
Yeah, agriculture. The locals that lives in the areas, they just venture in there with the cows, and they hang around there long enough. They start, doing bush clearing, getting rid of the trees, and creating land to grow their crops, and the animals are just driven off. Right.
Well, Jaco, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. Congratulations on being the Professional Hunter of the Year in 2020.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
And that concludes this episode of the WanderLearn podcast, where we explore travel, technology, and transformation. If you'd like to see the show notes with links to what we talked about, or if you'd like to comment on the show, or if you'd like to ask me a question, then go to WanderLearn.com and click on this episode. If you'd like to connect with me, just remember Tapon. That's my first initial and my last name. Tapon is the username I use on all social media. You can also get to my website by going to ftapon.com. And here's one last reason to remember Tapon. If you like what I do and would like to get rewarded for supporting my projects, then go to patreon.com/ftapon. That's where you can pick up some remarkable rewards for as little as $2 a month. And now for 5 quick favors. Number 1, subscribe to the WanderLearn podcast. 2, download it. 3, share it. 4, review it somewhere. And 5, sign up for my newsletter at WanderLearn.com. Our theme music was composed by Eric Stratman. This is Francis Tapon, encouraging you to wander and learn.